Hello everyone, this is Ari Moshe Wolf. I'm going to speak a little bit about Saturn entering into Aquarius. Whenever Saturn enters a new sign, it's a significant shift within consciousness. This will happen once every 2.5 years or so. And Saturn in transit really speaks to where there is a ground of integration and crystallization, vocalization of awareness. It's where consciousness, which is inherently open and undefined, is at this time required to become very conscious of the boundaries, the structures, the forms, the parameters that will allow it to define how it is choosing to inhabit and experience this human experience. Saturn really requires, it demands self-consciousness, boundaries, clarity. How am I choosing consciously to work within time and space, to consciously work within this realm of form, body, structure, plans? Now, whenever we work with Saturn, we have to appreciate that we're also accounting for the larger schematic of the world, how society views time, how society views structure, how society views the various ways in which we crystallize and focalize ourselves within time and space. We have the rules, we have the governments, we have social systems, we have customs and cultural norms, things that are judged and recognized as how things are supposed to be. Cultural behaviors, social behaviors. In the United States, it might be more acceptable in some places for two men to hold hands together, whereas in other places in the world that wouldn't be acceptable. Saturn deals with all of that, right? So we have this relationship between the boundaries and the structures that are sort of inherent to this human experience, to being here on Earth, and learning to respect those, like the trees behind me, how they all start off very small and young, and that has its own flow, where the human body starts off very fragile and young and delicate. Everything grows and develops in time, and we learn to respect those boundaries or those parameters. Or if you cross the street, you need to look both ways, otherwise you might get hit by a car. We learn responsibility in those ways. But we also have with Saturn this other dimension, which is all these created judgments and conceptions about right and wrong. So whenever Saturn moves into a new sign, it's actually really bringing up, relative to that particular sign, that domain of consciousness, where there is, on the one hand, a calling to become more conscious, self-responsible, and embodied, and appreciating the necessary restrictions and limitations to become integrated at this time, but also where there's a need to become self-reflective, introspective, and maybe separate from the prevailing status quo, the way the world and society says and judges this is how things have to be. And so Saturn actually invites a deep quality of internalization to access and claim and realize our own inner authority. Because if we're living entirely according to an external standard of judgment, then our reference point for life is never going to come from a deeply meaningful place. Our sense of success will become entirely dependent upon what society approves of, our parents, our principals, our bosses, our concepts of other, how we project it, and we say, okay, if they're approving me, if my friends, if my peers, if society, if my idea of external authority says you're good, you're doing a good job, then I will feel valid within myself. So we need to claim that inner authority and say, how am I choosing to work within time and space and structure in a way that resonates with my own inner ethics, right? So we all know we don't cross the road without looking both ways. We don't teach that to a child. There's an intuitive respect and appreciation for all things that are fragile and delicate in life, so that that which is fragile and delicate can be protected within necessary boundaries. And these boundaries aren't like this rule, like it's wrong to do this, it's wrong to do that. It's more of an understanding of rightness, right? Of what's right and what's wrong from this intuitive, compassionate, sensible awareness. So we have to understand that there's a natural right and there's a natural wrong, and that these rights and wrongs aren't these like, you're a bad person if you do it this way. It's more of an intuitive, sensible understanding of what it looks like, what it feels like, what it looks like to demonstrate consciousness, conscientiousness, and respect for the natural boundaries that are required in life. And we apply that to how we treat one another, how we interact socially, financially, sexually, relationally. There's a certain level of accountability. Now, there comes a point where we really have to look inside and ask, am I holding myself back because of a concept of it's wrong to do this or say this or want this or act this way? Or do I need to, hold back and repress and be accountable to others, to my environment, to my community? And this is where Saturn in Aquarius really asks us to take a big step back. Whenever we work within the realm of Aquarius, we're working within a realm of consciousness that is inherently undefined and unqualified according to what is known. It has no connection to what you can measure, to what you can define, to what can be classified within the known world. Aquarius, in its very essence, points to the unconditioned mind, the unconditioned self. It's the intelligence of creation itself prior to time. And so Aquarius points to this quality of being that's inherent to who we are as we are created, our own soul individuality, and that all of life reflects these archetypal energetics that are inherently and objectively what they are prior to our interpretation of them. It's almost like the stars and astrology, all that is real and exists, even if we're not following it, right? Our own sense of community and interconnection with all of the cosmos reflects this greater principle that all of life is one ecosystem, and that all the elements of this ecosystem reflect the thoughts of Creator. And thus, within Aquarius, there's a deeper, higher, more evolved understanding that we can really access, which says everything is exactly as it is created to be. And everything falls in place and comes into alignment with respect to everything else in creation. That all the stars are positioned perfectly and exactly where they are. And that when we are being ourselves, we find that we all are positioned relative to one another in just exactly the right way. The thing with Aquarius is when we put too many conditions, ideas of what it looks like to be here, we can sort of resist this natural and spontaneous and sort of unefforted unfolding of consciousness intelligently designing itself in its own way. And so when Saturn's in Aquarius, it actually is calling us to consciously become aware. Saturn is awareness. Saturn is what we can measure and define, right? We can really grab it. A world, a reality, a structural reality, how we live here as human beings with respect to that which is unconditioned. How do you do that? How do you create a structural reality with respect to that which is unconditioned? Well, from one perspective, you don't. There's always some level of conditioning kind of getting its way in there. And for most souls on this planet, there is sort of just this movement towards greater unconditioning. And so the ways that we live will become a little open, a little more loose, a little freer. The circles will become less closed and open up, less exclusivity, and more attunement, higher intelligence, clearer thinking that aligns more with the cosmos. But on the deepest level, Saturn in Aquarius really reflects the liberation of our own minds. It is not about knowing and grabbing form and definition in the sense of this is what it means to be a human being, but it's actually liberating our thoughts and disciplining Saturn, a way of thinking that aligns with the actual nature of the cosmos. How is reality structured according to the mind of God? It's becoming more intelligent to apprehend a more inclusive and complex, holistic understanding of all that is in relationship to itself. What can't work in that are judgments. What can't work in that are preconceived convictions for how things have to be. Too many answers and certainties here could get in the way of perceiving higher possibilities for what it looks like and what it means to be a human being now. Liberating our mind and being open to greater possibilities means, first and foremost, suspending our convictions. What we are already certain has to be. And then, having the innocence of the fool. You know, Aquarius I often associate with the fool, which in the tarot is like that character that's sort of moving off of a cliff and isn't thinking I'm walking off of a cliff. There's an inherent openness and freedom in the mind to experience without a preconceived idea of what that experience is or has to be. Connecting more with that original mind, that freedom of innocence. Now, the work here is to apply this in our lives, to bring that into our relationships, our family structures, our jobs, how we make money, and to give it some space. If there's pressure and stress and a sense of urgency, if we feel like we're fighting time, that's a sign that we're not seeing and thinking clearly. Because time isn't a thing to fight. That itself is a manifestation of how we've been living and how we become confused here on this planet in the way that we've structured ourselves. Time itself is not an original function that is dominating us. It is a thing to use. It is not the primary reality. So in Costa Rica in a couple months, I'll be giving a much larger talk on this topic. I'll be speaking about Saturn in particular as it relates to the healing of sexuality and relationships in the new paradigm. Normally when we think of sexuality and relationships, we're thinking of, you know, Mars and Venus, Aries and Libra and all that kind of stuff. But actually, Saturn is so significant because it's actually sort of a bottom line. What are our ideas of what it looks like and what's allowed here on this planet? And when we're not creating a life for ourselves, a structural reality for ourselves and for each other that's rooted in fear and control, there is that space that opens up to see possibilities that we've otherwise never imagined were even possible or allowed. So a couple thoughts on this, just to offer this now. There's an inherent quality in Aquarius of trust and friendliness. And that quality of trust and friendliness is also inclusivity, where consciousness looks upon reality in the way that you look upon a friendly neighbor. It says we're all here together. And thus we are all a part of God's mind. We're all a part of this fabric of creation that has already been set in motion. And beyond our ideas of me and you, there's what is. And the appreciation and the respect for us all being here together is a very profound experience within Aquarius. Because it appreciates that when we are being ourselves, when we are resonating authentically as we are, there's an inherent curiosity and openness and joy that blossoms within our hearts to create a life that only us can create together. Trees are not the same as a forest. When trees come together, we have ecosystems with so many other elements. And so the more we come together with respect to the qualities of friendliness and inclusion, the more we create a vibrant life. And the key theme here is thriving, co-thriving, right? Taking the idea of thriving, but linking it only with community. Any notion of thriving that is isolated in a vacuum is missing the true meaning and the true point of what wellness really is. The other point I want to share here is that Aquarius symbolizes this principle that the entire universe also exists inside. Because it would actually be inaccurate to say that all of creation is this one big giant ecosystem, and thus to quantify it in terms of this immeasurable size of space. It's also an incomprehensible, internal, invisible, silent space of infinite vastness. It's because the one is contained within the whole, and that everything reflects everything. And so, while the notion of thriving itself connects very deeply to the consciousness of us together, simultaneously, there's a deep importance during this time. And I'll be sharing more videos, but definitely talking a lot more about this in a couple months in Costa Rica. There's great importance of understanding that all of the elements, all the characters, all the community members, all the planets that are out there are also in here. And that we actually cannot truly understand and include more of external reality within our bubble without actually seeing it and meeting it inside of ourselves. In fact, relative to Saturn, there's no space to bring in new information. It's like, I can't see that. I mean, like an old curmudgeon-y person that is set in their ways and just can't imagine, you know, these young people living the life that they're living. There's cognitive dissonance. We all have our own form of cognitive dissonance, which really just reflects parts of our own universal psyche inside of ourselves that we've denied, that we've repressed. And so this is a really strong time where life is sort of pushing us to access parts of our own psyche that we may not even be aware of. So during this time, spending time creating space to observe, to listen to the dream symbols, to the synchronicities, to the signs, and to really take everything in from this viewpoint of what can I give more freedom? What can I give more space? What can I include and bring more acceptance and inclusivity and friendliness towards inside of myself? We are approaching an amazing time, a really fascinating time on this planet. Right now, Saturn finishing its time in Capricorn, Mars and Jupiter there, and Saturn is going to be moving back and forth from Aquarius to Capricorn for the rest of this year. So we're in this very potent transition, then it'll square Uranus. It signifies a very potent foundational life change on this planet over the next couple years. So this is a great time to really be looking at ourselves and how we're living, to be questioning our core assumptions and to unravel what we've come to believe has to be, to give space for what is and what naturally wants to be.